You've done this 1,000 times without ever asking why. A hand reaches for another hand, eyes lock for a second too long. A face leans in close, closer than you'd ever let a stranger get. You don't think about it. It just happens. But the real answer for why your body knows how to do this is far stranger than anything you learned in health class. Because for most of the animal kingdom, intimacy doesn't look anything like this. No eye contact, no face-to-face closeness, no lingering. Just biology, fast and functional. So somewhere in your ancestral past, something shifted. Something rewired the most basic act in nature into something emotional. Something bonding. Something that felt like love. And nobody planned it. It wasn't a decision. It was millions of years of small accidents stacking on top of each other until one day, a completely different species of primate stood up, looked into another creature's eyes, and felt something no animal before it had ever felt in quite the same way. Let's go back. Not centuries, not even thousands of years, millions. Picture the earliest primates, long before anything resembling a human walked the earth. Their world was simple. Mating was brief, practical, and almost entirely disconnected from anything you'd call romance. Positioning was efficient, eye contact was rare, there was no kissing, no slow buildup, no lingering closeness afterward. It was biology doing its job, nothing more. Most mammals still behave this way today. Quick, functional, barely social at all. So what changed for us? The answer starts with something you'd never expect to matter: how our ancestors learned to walk. When early hominins shifted from moving on 4 limbs to walking upright on 2, it triggered a cascade of changes throughout the entire body. The pelvis narrowed, the spine curved differently, and the angle of, well, everything changed with it. Positions that worked easily for 4-legged primates became awkward for an upright bipedal body. Something had to give, and what emerged from that anatomical shift was something almost no other primate does by default. Face-to-face intimacy. Close. Personal. Direct eye contact inches away from another living creature's expression. Think about how enormous that shift actually is. For nearly every other species on this planet, closeness like that would be unbearable. Prolonged eye contact between animals often signals aggression, a challenge, a threat. But somewhere in your ancestry, staring into another creature's eyes stopped being a warning sign and started being something else entirely. It became a way of reading each other, a way of checking in. Are you okay? Do you trust me? Do you feel what I feel? Your ancestors were, without knowing it, inventing a completely new form of communication using nothing but proximity and eye contact. But bodies don't rewire themselves just because a new position becomes possible. Something deeper had to shift too. And that something was chemical. Here's where it gets stranger. Most primates only mate during specific, visible windows of fertility. Their bodies broadcast it: swelling, coloring, scent, unmistakable signals that say, right now, this is possible. Outside of that window, mating essentially stops. But somewhere along the human evolutionary line, that visible signal disappeared. Ovulation became hidden, invisible, even to the female herself in many cases. And once that visible signal vanished, something had to replace it, because a species can't survive on random chance alone. That replacement was connection. Constant, year-round bonding between partners, not tied to a fertility window at all. Intimacy stopped being an occasional biological event and became a regular part of the relationship between two people. Something used to build trust. Something used to maintain a bond long after any single act was over. This is the part that tends to surprise people the most. Reproduction wasn't actually the driving force behind most of what evolved. Bonding was. Your brain rewarded closeness with a flood of specific chemicals, oxytocin and vasopressin among them. Chemicals that create attachment, trust, and a felt sense of safety with another person. The same chemical system that bonds a parent to a newborn baby is deeply intertwined with the chemical system activated during intimacy between partners. Your brain, in a very real sense, uses the exact same wiring for both. Love for a partner and love for a child are chemically closer cousins than most people realize. That single fact rewrites the entire story. Intimacy wasn't just about making more humans, it was about keeping humans together long enough to raise the ones they already had. A human infant is helpless for years, not weeks. It needs two committed caregivers or an entire committed group to survive that stretch. So evolution didn't just need reproduction to happen, it needed reproduction to be followed by loyalty. And loyalty needed glue. That glue was intimacy, reshaped from a purely reproductive act into an emotional one, a bonding ritual disguised as biology. Now, here's the twist that almost nobody expects. For most of human history, this deeply personal act wasn't actually private at all. Early human groups lived in incredibly close quarters. Small shelters, shared fires, minimal separation between families. For an enormous stretch of prehistory, true privacy, the kind you take for granted behind a closed bedroom door, simply didn't exist in the way you'd imagine it. Intimacy often happened close to others, muffled by darkness, by distance, by an unspoken social agreement to not pay attention. It's only much later, as human settlements grew more complex, as walls and rooms and doors became architectural norms, that privacy around intimacy became not just possible, but expected. What feels like an ancient, obvious human instinct, the desire for privacy during closeness, is actually a relatively recent cultural development layered on top of a much older, far less private reality. Even kissing, something that feels like it must be as old as humanity itself, has a surprisingly murky and debated origin. One leading idea traces it back to something almost unrecognizable from romance at all: mothers feeding infants mouth to mouth, transferring softened food directly, a survival practice long before it became any kind of romantic gesture. Over generations, that same closeness, mouth to mouth, breath to breath, may have been repurposed by adults as a way to test compatibility, to sense another person's health, their scent, their chemistry, all without a single conscious thought about why it felt so significant. And that pattern, an ancient survival behavior slowly reshaped into an emotional one, shows up again and again throughout this story. Grooming among earlier primates, picking through fur, removing parasites, wasn't originally about affection either. It was hygiene. But it also released the same bonding chemicals now associated with human touch. Slowly, across an almost incomprehensible span of time, functional touch became emotional touch. Survival behavior became affection. None of this was designed. There was no moment where an ancestor decided, from now on, this will mean something. It emerged the same way almost everything in evolution emerges: small variations, repeated over immense stretches of time until the accumulated result looks intentional even though it never was. So the next time you find yourself holding someone's gaze a little too long, or reaching for a hand without thinking, or leaning in closer than logic requires, you're not just performing a modern social ritual. You're running code that's been compiling for millions of years. Bipedalism rearranged your body, hidden ovulation rewired your incentives, chemistry disguised survival as love. And somewhere in that long accidental chain, closeness stopped being about reproduction and started being about connection. You didn't invent intimacy. You inherited it, quietly, from a species that needed to feel close to survive. And every time you reach for someone's hand without thinking, that's not romance talking. That's a million years of survival, still running in the background,